I'm Jennifer Poindexter, the Director of the Promotion and Education Programs at Missouri Farm Bureau. Today I'm joined by Jacob Jones. Jacob, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, Jacob.
So obviously my name is Jacob Jones. I live here in New Madrid County with my wife and her family. I am a first-generation farmer, but I work alongside my in-laws that I believe are fourth-generation farmers. So that's what you see here.
So we're standing on the edge of a rice field here. Can you tell us a little bit about what we're seeing and just a little bit about the rice itself?
Yeah, so we plant rice. This is rice, as you said. We plant rice hopefully in the month of May. If you get to June, it's really too late. We push to the middle towards the end of May purely because we also grow corn and we can't harvest the corn and the rice at the same time. We don't have enough manpower. Some folks will plant their rice at the end of April, and it finishes out the season earlier and they can start harvest earlier.
So how long is the growing season? How long is it going to be in the field for?
So we'll plant second half of May and we'll start harvest in October. We'll drain the fields in September, and then yeah.
So you said you're going to drain the field, and looking out here I can kind of see the standing water. Is this flooded, and why is it flooded?
Yeah, so every rice field we have is flood irrigation. So what that means is we put every field to grade. So the high end up here would be the crown, and the water starts here and flows to what we call the low end of the field for obvious reasons. Each field over a quarter mile of distance has about a foot of fall. And every 200 feet or so, we'll come in and put a levee in at every 2/10 of fall. Now what that does is it allows us to have one rice paddy that's all ankle deep water. Okay. So it's ankle deep there, and it's about ankle deep at the high end as well in each paddy.
So why is the rice flooded? Does it have something to do with the root structure, or does it just need a lot of water?
It just needs water. Rice grows better when it's got wet feet, and it'll burn up if it's not underwater. In fact, I've got buckets of rice over there we can look at later for that. All right, so we mentioned earlier that rice really likes wet feet. This rice in this bucket has been sitting here for about 2 weeks, and this rice I just pulled this morning. So you can kind of see this is a little bit yellow, kind of looks dried out. That's because it's been sitting in a bucket for so long. And this one has been in the field with the water up until about 2 hours ago. So you can see these heads are still green. It's from the same field. This one was just pulled about 2 weeks ago, and it's got water in the bucket, but not much. So this one's dried out, and these heads have stopped growing, and these were still growing this morning, so they'll continue to get longer and drape over.
So we talk a lot about how in corn there's sweet corn and there's field corn. There's two specific kinds, one for humans and one for animals. Is rice the same way?
Yes and no. There are many different varieties of rice, just like there are a lot of varieties of both corn and soybeans and wheat, and there's not so much this is for human consumption, this is not. There are differences. Actually, there's no difference between white rice and brown rice, which we can get into if you want. Most of the varieties are like, this is diamond rice, that's a variety. You also have clearfield rice, which has varieties within that. You've probably heard of jasmine rice, which is kind of the hot topic now. The only difference there is it's supposed to smell better when you cook it. So if you're into that, that's okay. But it's all rice. You can get short grain rice, medium grain rice, and long grain rice. And most of what's grown in the United States, particularly in this region, is long grain. There are a few medium grain folks around, but they've got niche markets.
So when you grow this rice, is it going to it's going into grocery stores and being fed to consumers?
Most likely, yeah. It can go to animal feed, which is where a lot of our corn goes. We used to grow rice for Riceland, which has a plant down here, so you've probably seen bags of rice at Walmart that say Riceland on them. That's literally rice that goes from some of our fields through the plant and into the grocery store. Most of ours gets exported, still human consumption, just not locally.
So when you talk exported, what does exported mean, and where does that go, or do you know where it goes once it's exported?
We don't always know. A lot of it used to go to China. Obviously, it's not anymore. But we are here in our region. We're about 25 minutes from the Mississippi River, so a lot of ours gets loaded on trucks, and we haul it to the river where they load it on barges, and they'll send it on down to the Gulf, and from there it's spread around the world.
So you talked about the difference between brown and rice and how it's the same, but when it's marketed, it's not the same. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about that?
That's my favorite subject, because I think you should educate yourself before you eat stuff. Brown rice, all rice starts out as brown rice. When you have rice, you have what's called the hull on the outside, and it's sharp and pokey and hurts when you step on it, and it wears out your equipment. They'll process and tear that hull off, which then leaves brown rice. The brown rice, all that is white rice with 3 or 4 additional bran layers. It's just fiber.
Yeah.
So if you eat brown rice, the difference between that and white rice is you get additional fiber. So if you need fiber in your diet, it's healthier. If you don't, it's the same thing. So they'll further polish it down, polish off those bran layers, and then you're left with white rice, which is mostly starch.
Right. It's very interesting. So, you know, sometimes we talk about the life cycles of plants being annual and perennial. Most things we plant in Missouri are annual, so you plant them annually. Is rice a perennial or an annual?
No, it's an annual. We plant it every year. In fact, when we drain the field, we'll come in and tear the levees down and flatten them back out, and this field will be in soybeans next year. So then,
it's part of your crop rotation.
Right. We rotate soybeans and rice for the most part. We have a few fields that will do all 3, rice, soybeans, and corn, but not very many.
So what kind of soil does rice like?
So it is a big fan of heavy clay soils, mostly because it requires so much water. If you want to grow rice on sand, I suppose you can, as long as you can keep enough water on it.
Yeah. So can you kind of talk a little bit about the difference between sand and clay and the water filtration that both have?
Yeah, so sandy soils are where you're going to grow your cotton and your corn and your good soybeans, your wheat, things like that. Sandy soils have a larger particle size. I mean, if you've ever looked at play sand, it's really grainy. Each one of those is a particle size. Your clay soils, like what we grow rice in, actually have a very small particle size, even though when you pick up a clump of it, it looks like one big particle. It's made up of millions of small particles. So what that does is it gives you more sites on each particle to hold water, and so that's why it holds water better. It also holds fertilizer better, but it has drainage issues. So sometimes corn doesn't do as well on your heavy clay soils because it won't drain.
Right. So you said we're about 25 miles from the Mississippi River here.
Yep.
Does that play a role in the soil type?
Yeah, so there's actually an article out now about it, but all of these soils are what they call Mississippi alluvial soils, which are just, you know, the Mississippi River used to run through here, so it's an ancient floodplain is what this is. In fact, where we stand used to be a swamp. There's still swamp in those trees, so I don't recommend exploring. But what that does is just over millennia is deposited some really rich soils and allows us to grow really good crops. And with the Mississippi River being so close and the drainage out of the hills from the north, we're in the Ogallala aquifer, which is just fun to say. So it gives us some options for irrigation that other regions don't have.
It's interesting. You kind of talked a little bit about how you're the first generation and that your wife Kimberly's family has been here. But what made you want to farm in the first place?
So I started out as a geology major out of high school. I was going to be a volcanologist and study volcanoes. So I like soils, which is why I probably gave too much information about dirt. My professor always said dirt was dead and soil's not, so don't call it dirt.
Yeah, yeah.
But I got into college and made it through the first level of calculus, and they were like, you're gonna have to take all the levels of calculus. And I was like, or not. So I changed majors a few times, with the only stipulation being I wanted to work outside for a living. I didn't want to work inside in an office. So I have achieved that goal. I went to the University of Missouri in Columbia as an animal science major, intending to go on to the veterinary school. Mm-hmm. So I did not do that because they told me it was another 4 years and another $200 grand. So I graduated with a bachelor's degree in animal science, which I am not using, but it is an ag degree, and along the ways I took some soil science courses. So a college education is still worth something. It gives you an ability to have a conversation at a higher level than you might be able to otherwise. So I graduated with my bachelor's degree in animal science. Through college, I volunteered at a local dairy farm about 30 minutes north of here. Volunteered. We called it an internship, but I didn't get paid, so it's volunteer.
Yeah.
Which was cool. That was a lot of fun. And then the next summer I worked here on the farm, and they offered me a job if I wanted it later on. So that's how we got here.
That's cool. You know, your in-laws have been here a long time. Have they always done rice and soybeans, or is this like a newer crop to them?
They have done rice, as far as I'm aware, since at least the 80s. So, yes.
A long time.
I'm not that old.
Yeah.
So for me, yeah, they've always done it. They were corn-soybean rotation before that.
Okay. So what do you think is one of the biggest hurdles farmers face as far as, like, what do you wish consumers knew more of?
Honestly, I just wish they were a little bit more educated on what they're eating and the science behind it. You can choose to support science or not support science, but if you're going to support it all.
So that leads me into wondering, you know, this is a flooded field.
Mm-hmm.
Can you take equipment on a flooded field?
You can, if it's good enough equipment. That's a large part why we'll flood it, or why we'll drain it.
Is so that you can get equipment out there.
Right.
And you probably have to have tracks, I'm assuming.
Well, you don't have to. We do, but as long as you've got good four-wheel drive, narrower tires, taller tires, what we call rice and cane tires, you'll be all right.
So, do you do anything with rice hulls? Like, does that go towards livestock, or do you guys have a say in where that goes?
We do not do anything with the rice hulls. The rice hull is still on the grain when we ship it off, so that's not our step.
Can you talk a little bit about the machinery that you use to you know, grow rice and soybeans here?
Yeah, sure. So as far as planting goes, we drill the rice just like many of you have probably seen people drill soybeans or other crops. It's the same equipment that we use here in this field.
Like a no-till drill?
We don't have one of those.
Okay.
I would like to.
Yeah.
Some people do.
Yeah.
And then as far as harvest, it's the same combine. Our combine is set up a little bit more for rice in that the innards are a little more aggressive because rice is really tough on your equipment. So it doesn't wear out quite as fast if it's set up to harvest rice. And then we'll change the head on the combine to a rice specific machine. So this is our rice header, and this is what we put on the front of the combine to harvest our rice. It is affectionately known as a stripper header because that is its legal name. The way it works, if you can see underneath, it's got a drum with what we call fingers. It has about 6 or 7 rows of these fingers, and that drum spins anywhere from about 420 to about 540 revolutions per minute, depending on where I set it in the combine. And that spins and it strips the grain off of the plant. So pretty much all we run through the combine is the grain itself. So it saves a lot of wear and tear on the machine, which is important because rice is so rough on it already.
Do you have to spray any herbicides or fungicides on rice?
We do, yeah. We'll spray before we flood it. We spray it a few times. And then here about a week or 2 ago, we start checking for other diseases and spray some fungicide on for that.
So when we talk to farmers, they talk about crop scouting and how they walk the fields and check for diseases and bugs. How do you crop scout rice when it's flooded?
The same way, you just put rubber boots on and do it.
All right, because it's only ankle deep, right?
Right.